There's a man in Tokyo who commutes every morning on the Chiyoda line. He buys a 650 yen coffee from 7-Eleven. He wears a suit from Aoyama, the kind that costs 30,000 yen off the rack, maybe a little more if he's feeling extravagant. He blends into the morning crowd so completely that nobody looks twice. He's worth over $2 billion, and that is not an accident. While Western billionaires are competing to see who can own the most obnoxious superyacht, Jeff Bezos famously needed a Dutch historic bridge partially dismantled just so his boat could float through. Japan's ultra-wealthy are doing something that feels almost alien to us. They're hiding. Deliberately, methodically, generationally hiding. And the more I've read about it, the more I've come to believe that it's one of the most sophisticated financial strategies on the planet. Not just a cultural footnote, an actual edge.
Japan has approximately 3.7 million millionaires. Forbes officially counts 12 billionaires, but officially is doing enormous work in that sentence. Because the actual concentration of private wealth in Japan, tucked inside family trusts, unlisted holding companies, and land holdings that haven't changed hands in 4 generations, is almost certainly far higher. We just can't measure it. And that's the whole point. There's a Japanese proverb most people have heard. Deru kugi wa utareru. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. People tend to treat this as a cute cultural footnote, something to mention at dinner parties. But for Japan's wealthiest individuals, this saying is not a metaphor. It's a financial survival doctrine, as real and practical as a tax strategy. And then comes 2026. Social media surveillance in Japan has quietly become one of the most sophisticated in the developed world. The NTA, Japan's national tax agency, has been using digital behavior analytics since at least 2023, cross-referencing Instagram location tags near luxury retailers, tracking imported goods delivery patterns, flagging lifestyle signals against declared income. By 2026, wealthy individuals who were already careful have become even more careful. Not paranoid, methodical. One wealth manager, operating out of Minato Ward, Tokyo, described his client's approach to digital presence as active disappearance policy. Not shy, not modest, strategic. Walk down a residential street in Denen-shofu, one of Tokyo's oldest and most expensive neighborhoods, and something immediately feels off. The houses look tired. Concrete facades with Showa-era weathering, narrow gates, no announcement of status. Nothing like the Beverly Hills estates you'd expect if this neighborhood housed some of Japan's wealthiest families. Step through one of those front doors, though, and you might find yourself standing in a $3 million interior renovation. Imported stone, hidden climate systems, a sake cellar stocked with bottles the owner will never put on display outside this room. The outside is drab on purpose. It's not neglect, it's camouflage. The same logic applies to cars. Japan's genuinely wealthy drive domestic vehicles, a Toyota Century, a Crown, maybe a high-spec Alphard with tinted windows. These cars say successful, not flashy. You will not find a Lamborghini Urus sitting outside a billionaire's house in Setagaya. Not because they can't afford it, because owning one is a liability. It attracts neighbors, it attracts the NTA. And in Japan, being noticed by neighbors is not merely embarrassing. It's the beginning of a very uncomfortable series of events. There's also an entire parallel economy that almost nobody in Western financial media covers. Private shopping floors, members-only boutiques with zero public signage. Brands like Hermes and a handful of top Japanese lacquer warehouses have arrangements with ultra-high net worth clients that allow for completely private purchasing. No retail floor cameras, no loyalty program receipts, no digital trail attached to a real name. You spend, the transaction disappears. Honestly, I find this whole architecture kind of stunning. Not because it's secretive, but because it requires a discipline that almost no wealthy person in a Western country has ever needed to develop. Tadashi Yanai, the founder of Fast Retailing, the company behind Uniqlo, is Japan's richest person, worth roughly $46 billion depending on the day. And for years, he gave interviews that focused relentlessly on failure, on his father's small clothing shop in Yamaguchi, on the near collapse of his early business. Not in the polished TED Talk ready way American tech founders perform humility. In a genuinely uncomfortable, detailed, almost anxious way. That is not a PR strategy. That is culture, internalized so deeply it doesn't feel like culture anymore. There's a concept in Japanese social psychology, Higaisha Ishiki, which translates roughly as victim consciousness. In a Japanese context, displaying wealth in front of people who are struggling is read as an act of provocation, not just rude, an assertion of superiority over people who are already under pressure. And Japan's middle class has been under real, sustained pressure. Real wages have been effectively flat since the early 1990s, the lost decade extended into two, and housing costs in major cities have pushed younger generations into a permanent rental economy. In that context, showing off isn't gauche, it's offensive, and Japan's wealthy understand this at a cellular level. Nobody talks about where this actually comes from. I don't know why. The Japanese merchant class, the chonin, sat at the bottom of the Edo period Tokugawa social hierarchy, despite being in many cases the wealthiest people in the country. Samurai ranked above them, farmers ranked above them, even artisans ranked above them. They were necessary, rich, and officially beneath everyone else. So they learned to hide it. They stored their wealth in art scrolls tucked behind plain walls, in sake that vanished before officials arrived, in craftsmanship that looked modest until you knew what to look for. The billionaire taking the subway in 2026 is running a playbook that's at least 400 years old. I don't think enough people appreciate how deep that inheritance actually runs.
Here are the stakes in concrete terms. In 2024, the NTA reportedly identified over 8,700 high-income individuals for audit, primarily based on digital lifestyle indicators, not financial discrepancies. Lifestyle signals, a car, a vacation post, a delivery pattern. Visible wealth is a literal audit trigger. So the math becomes very clear very fast. If you hold $50 million in assets and you park a $400,000 car in your driveway, you have just handed a government agency with full access to your financial records a reason to look at you. That's not paranoia, that's a rational cost-benefit calculation, and Japan's wealthy are making it constantly. And beyond the government, there's the neighborhood. Japan has an informal community surveillance culture that has no real Western equivalent. Neighborhood associations, Kairon-ban notice boards, community networks where everyone knows roughly when you leave, what gets delivered, what kind of car you drive. Community monitoring is seen as a virtue there, not an intrusion. For someone with significant assets, that network is a constant low-level deterrent, because word travels in ways that no NTA audit could replicate. In my opinion, this is actually the more interesting story, not the government pressure, but the social one. You can structure around tax risk. You can't structure around the fact that your neighbors know everything. Now, the 2026 trend that's genuinely underreported, Japan's wealthy are increasingly routing discretionary spending away from personal luxury goods entirely and into what's being called private community micro-investing, anonymous funding for neighborhood infrastructure, quietly sponsoring a local matsuri, providing low-interest capital for a small artisan business to survive another year. These expenditures generate something that no Rolex can generate: invisible, non-depreciating goodwill. A watch loses status value as trends shift. A neighborhood that quietly respects you? That has no price tag and no paper trail. The next generation is playing a different game entirely. Japan's younger tech wealth, founders who came out of the Mercari, Smart HR, and early 2020 SaaS wave, isn't just hiding assets behind aging concrete facades and domestic vehicles. They're moving capital into spaces that don't have a physical address. Decentralized digital assets held in cold storage, equity positions in foreign holding structures domiciled in Singapore, Luxembourg, the Caymans, private fund stakes that generate zero domestic footprint. You can hold $100 million in a structure like that and have nothing in Japan that looks like $100 million. No house that signals it, no car that betrays it, no shopping pattern that flags it. Here's the counterintuitive part, and this is the angle I haven't seen anyone else make. This forced invisibility is producing a generation of genuinely financially literate wealthy people. Because when you cannot flaunt it, you have to understand it.
You have to know how compounding works across asset classes, how private equity actually generates returns, how currency hedging protects generational wealth. You can't outsource the thinking to a status symbol. There's no shortcut. The discipline that started as social pressure has over time created a class of capital allocators who are, quietly, without anyone noticing, more sophisticated than most of their peers in any other country, and the world is starting to catch up to them. Stealth wealth entered mainstream Western discourse around 2022 and 2023. Quiet luxury fashion, understated consumption, the aesthetic of old money that doesn't need to announce itself. By 2026, it's a genuine movement, a TikTok trend, a marketing category. But for Japan's wealthy, it was never a trend, never an aesthetic choice, never a reaction to anything. It's just how wealth has always worked there, quietly, continuously, for centuries. There's something almost funny about that. The West discovering an approach Japan never had to name because it never needed to.